When my mother screamed, "Look at her infected wounds," to the entire emergency room, pointing at my childhood scars like evidence of my failure, she had no idea I was about to show her my medical license. But honey, sometimes the best medicine is a perfectly timed dose of poetic justice. Ladies, let me tell you about the night my mother tried to humiliate me in front of an entire hospital emergency room, and how that moment became the most beautiful revelation of my life. My name is Dr. Sophia Blake, and this is the story of how being called a diseased failure by my own mother led to the most satisfying professional triumph you'll ever hear. Growing up, I was what you'd call the problem child in the Richardson family. Not because I was rebellious or wild, but because I had the audacity to be born with severe eczema that left scars on my arms and legs. In my mother Victoria's world of country club perfection and social climbing, having a daughter with visible skin conditions was nothing short of a personal embarrassment. Mini cliffhanger, but what Victoria never understood was that those scars she was so ashamed of would become the very reason I'd dedicate my life to healing others, and eventually, to healing the wounds she'd inflicted on my soul. Picture our family. Victoria Richardson, real estate mogul with perfectly manicured nails and a smile that could sell million-dollar homes to anyone except her own daughter. My father Michael, a successful investment banker who treated me like a quarterly report that consistently underperformed. And then there was me, Sophia, the girl who wore long sleeves in summer and lived in fear of anyone seeing the skin that made my mother flinch. "Sophia, pull your sleeves down," Victoria would hiss whenever we went anywhere public. "People are staring at your arms. It's embarrassing." Embarrassing. That was her favorite word for describing me. My skin was embarrassing. My medical appointments were embarrassing. The fact that I couldn't wear the sleeveless dresses she wanted me to wear to charity galas was deeply, personally embarrassing to a woman whose entire identity revolved around appearances. Emotional foundation. Those words became the soundtrack of my childhood, but they also became the fuel for something much more powerful, a determination to prove that healing comes from understanding, not hiding. By the time I was 16, I decided to become a doctor. Not just any doctor, a dermatologist. I wanted to help people like me, people whose skin conditions made them feel less than perfect in a world obsessed with flawless appearances. Dermatology. Victoria laughed when I told her about my college plans. "Sophia, dear, you can't even fix your own skin problems. How do you expect to help anyone else?" But I had something Victoria never understood, empathy born from experience. Every patient I would eventually treat would see someone who understood exactly what they were going through, because I'd lived it too. Success building. The next 12 years were a masterclass in determination meeting opportunity. Pre-med at Northwestern University, where I graduated summa cum laude despite Victoria's constant reminders that I was wasting money on a degree I'd never use successfully. Medical school at Johns Hopkins, where I excelled in every rotation, but felt most at home in the dermatology clinic, working with patients whose stories echoed my own. My residency at Massachusetts General Hospital was grueling, 80-hour weeks, impossible caseloads, attending physicians who demanded perfection. But every time I wanted to quit, I thought about the 16-year-old girl who'd been told she was too flawed to help anyone else heal. Transformation moment. The day I received my board certification in dermatology was the day I stopped being Victoria's embarrassing daughter and became Dr. Sophia Blake, but she had no idea. You see, ladies, my parents and I had what you might call a complicated relationship during my medical training. They'd made it clear that my career choice was just another disappointment in a long line of personal failures. When I graduated medical school, Victoria didn't attend the ceremony because she was too busy showing houses to important clients. When I completed my residency, Michael sent a card with $50 inside like I'd graduated high school instead of becoming a doctor. And when I opened my own dermatology practice in Chicago, one of the most competitive medical markets in the country, they never even acknowledged it. Independence moment. I stopped trying to win their approval and started building the life I'd always dreamed of. Blake Dermatology became one of the most successful practices in the Midwest. I specialized in treating severe skin conditions, the cases other doctors found too challenging or time-consuming. Patients flew in from across the country to see me because I didn't just treat their conditions. I understood their shame, their frustration, their desperate hope for healing. My patient testimonials read like love letters. Dr. Blake saved my life. She understood my pain like no other doctor ever has. She made me feel beautiful again. But my parents never saw any of it. They lived in their bubble of social status and surface-level success, completely unaware that their failure daughter had become one of the most respected dermatologists in the region. Set up for confrontation, that willful ignorance was about to end in the most dramatic way possible. The call came on a Friday night while I was finishing patient charts in my office. My practice occupied the entire third floor of a medical building downtown, with state-of-the-art equipment and a waiting room that looked more like a luxury spa than a doctor's office. Dr. Blake, this is Northwestern Memorial Hospital. We have your parents in our emergency room. Your mother specifically requested that we call you. My blood ran cold. Despite everything between us, they were still my parents. What happened? Are they okay? There was a car accident. Your father has a concussion and some bruising, but your mother. Dr. Blake, she has significant facial lacerations. She's asking for you specifically. She says you're a doctor. Irony alert, the woman who'd spent my entire life being ashamed of my skin problems was now asking for help from the doctor I'd become because of those very problems. I drove to Northwestern Memorial in my BMW M5, the same car Victoria had once said I'd never be able to afford with my useless medical degree. Walking into that emergency room wearing my white coat with Dr. Sophia Blake, dermatology, embroidered on the pocket felt surreal. The charge nurse directed me to Trauma Bay 3, where I found my parents looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. Michael had a bandage on his forehead and was sitting up in bed, but Victoria's face was covered in cuts from broken glass, and she was crying in a way that had nothing to do with physical pain. Moment of truth. What happened next was 28 years of family dysfunction coming to a head in the most public way possible. Sophia, Victoria practically shouted when she saw me. Thank God you're here. I told them my daughter is a doctor, but these people don't seem to understand. She stopped mid-sentence when she noticed my white coat, my hospital ID badge, the stethoscope around my neck. For a moment, confusion flickered across her injured face. I don't understand, she said slowly. Why are you dressed like that? Because I am a doctor, Mother. Dr. Sophia Blake, board-certified dermatologist. I've been practicing medicine for the past 6 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's mouth fell open. Victoria stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Revelation building, but the real shock came when the attending physician arrived and addressed me with the kind of respect that made my parents' eyes widen. Dr. Blake, thank you for coming in so quickly. I'm Dr. Martinez, the attending tonight. I've reviewed your mother's injuries and, honestly, we could use your expertise here. The facial lacerations are extensive, and given your reputation for complex reconstructive work. Victoria's eyes darted between Dr. Martinez and me. Reputation? Complex reconstructive work? I don't understand what's happening. Dr. Martinez looked surprised. Mrs. Richardson, your daughter is one of the most respected dermatologists in Chicago. We refer our most challenging cases to her practice regularly. Blake Dermatology has the highest success rate for scar revision and facial reconstruction in the region. Power reversal. Watching my mother's worldview crumble in real time was both heartbreaking and deeply satisfying. That's impossible, Victoria whispered. Sophia has skin problems. She's always been. She's not. She can't be a successful doctor. The nurse attending to her injuries looked confused. Ma'am, Dr. Blake is highly respected in the medical community. She's published research papers, speaks at conferences. She's kind of famous in dermatology circles. I watched my mother process this information, saw the exact moment she realized that everything she thought she knew about her daughter was wrong. But ladies, what happened next was where the story took a turn that still gives me chills. Cliffhanger. Because Victoria being wrong about my success was just the beginning. What she did next revealed exactly who she really was and gave me the perfect opportunity to show her who I'd become. Instead of apologizing, instead of expressing pride or surprise or even basic acknowledgement of my achievements, Victoria looked at my scars, the ones visible on my hands and arms, and made a choice that would define our relationship forever. "Look at her infected wounds," she suddenly screamed, loud enough for the entire emergency room to hear. "She can't treat me. Look at her arms. She's diseased. She's got infections all over her body." The emergency room went silent. Nurses stopped mid-step. Other patients stared. Medical residents looked shocked. And I stood there in my white coat, with my medical degree and my successful practice and my reputation for excellence, being called diseased by the woman who'd given birth to me. Ultimate humiliation attempt, but Victoria wasn't done. She was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. "Security," she yelled, her voice echoing off the hospital walls. "Get this infected person away from me. She's going to contaminate everyone. Look at those wounds on her arms. She's not fit to be around sick people." Every eye in that emergency room was on me. Medical staff who'd respected me for years, patients who'd heard my mother's accusations, security guards who were being told to remove me from the hospital where I had privileges. And in that moment, ladies, I made a decision that would change everything. Power moment. I pulled out my medical license, held it up for everyone to see, and delivered the most satisfying response of my entire life. "These aren't infected wounds," I said, my voice calm and clear enough for everyone to hear. "These are scars from childhood eczema. And this," I held up my medical license, "is my board certification in dermatology from the American Academy of Dermatology." I turned to address the entire emergency room. "My name is Dr. Sophia Blake. I'm the founder of Blake Dermatology, and I specialize in treating patients with severe skin conditions exactly like the one that caused these scars. I became a doctor because I understand what it feels like to be judged by your appearance instead of your capabilities." Professional vindication. What happened next was the medical community rallying around one of their own. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "Dr. Blake is one of the most respected physicians in this hospital system. We'd be honored to have her consult on this case." The head nurse nodded. "Dr. Blake has privileges at this hospital and has consulted on dozens of our cases. Her expertise is invaluable." Even the security guards looked embarrassed. One of them actually said, "Ma'am, we're not removing a doctor from her own hospital." Victoria's face went white. Not from her injuries, but from the realization that she'd just publicly humiliated herself while trying to humiliate me. Moment of choice, and that's when I had to decide what kind of doctor and what kind of daughter I wanted to be. I could have walked away. I could have let another physician handle her case. I could have given her exactly the level of care and compassion she'd shown me throughout my life. But I took the Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. And walking away from a patient, even a patient who'd just called me diseased in front of colleagues, would have harmed my oath and my integrity. Dr. Martinez, I said, "I'll take the case. But I want it documented that the patient initially refused treatment from me based on discriminatory assumptions about my appearance." Professional excellence. What followed was the most satisfying hour of my medical career. I treated Victoria's facial lacerations with the same skill and precision I brought to every patient. I used techniques I developed through years of research, suturing methods that would minimize scarring, and post-operative care protocols that would give her the best possible cosmetic outcome. While I worked, I explained each step to the medical students observing. When treating facial trauma, we prioritize both function and aesthetics. The goal is healing that honors the patient's dignity, regardless of how they've treated others. Victoria couldn't speak during the procedure, her jaw was stabilized, but I could see her eyes. She was watching me work, seeing the respect other medical professionals showed me, hearing the way residents asked for my expertise on complex suturing techniques. Revelation moment. When the procedure was finished, Victoria finally understood exactly who her daughter had become. "Dr. Blake," one of the residents said as I finished the final suture, "that was incredible. The scarring should be minimal with that technique. Where did you learn that approach?" "I developed it," I replied, removing my gloves. "It's published in the Journal of Dermatologic Surgery. The Blake Technique for Facial Trauma Reconstruction." Victoria's eyes widened. My techniques had my name on them. I hadn't just become a doctor. I'd advanced the field of medicine. Post-procedure confrontation. When Victoria could finally speak, her first words revealed everything about who she really was. "Sophia," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the anesthesia. "I had no idea you were so successful. You had no idea because you never asked. You were too busy being embarrassed by my appearance to notice my accomplishments." She tried to reach for my hand. "Sweetheart, I'm proud of you. I always knew you'd do something special." Truth moment. I looked at this woman who'd spent my entire life making me feel defective, who'd just tried to have me removed from a hospital for being diseased, and I told her exactly what I thought of her revisionist history. "No, Mother. You didn't always know. You told me I was embarrassing. You said I'd never be successful. You made me wear long sleeves to hide scars that are now the reason I can help patients other doctors won't even see." I pulled up my sleeves, showing the scars she'd been ashamed of my entire life. "These marks taught me empathy. Your shame taught me resilience. And your lack of support taught me that the only validation I need is from the patients whose lives I change." Final power move. What I said next was 28 years of hurt and healing wrapped into one perfect moment of justice. "You called me diseased in front of my colleagues. You tried to have security remove me from my own hospital. You treated me with the same cruelty tonight that you've shown me my entire life. But you know what, Mother? I treated your injuries anyway, because that's what doctors do. We heal people, even people who've wounded us." Victoria started crying real tears, not the performative kind she used for social situations. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I was wrong about everything. Can you forgive me?" Ultimate choice. This was my moment to choose between revenge and redemption, between perpetuating the cycle of hurt or breaking it entirely. I looked at this woman who'd made my childhood hell, who'd just tried to destroy my professional reputation, who was only apologizing now because she needed something from me. And I made the choice that would define the rest of our relationship. "I can forgive you, Mother. But I can't forget. And I can't pretend that your apology erases 28 years of making me feel less than worthy." I handed her my business card, the one with Dr. Sophia Blake, MD, board-certified dermatologist, embossed in gold letters. If you ever want to understand what your daughter actually does for a living, you can start by reading the research papers I've published. They're all available online. Walking away moment. I left the hospital that night knowing I'd never again allow anyone to make me feel ashamed of the scars that made me who I am. 3 days later, Victoria called my office. Not my personal phone, my medical practice. She spoke to my receptionist like any other patient seeking treatment. "I'd like to schedule a follow-up appointment with Dr. Blake for scar revision consultation." When my receptionist told me about the call, I had to laugh. The woman who'd spent my life being ashamed of my scars now wanted my expertise to minimize her own. Professional boundaries. I scheduled the appointment, but with conditions that established exactly what our relationship would be moving forward. Victoria arrived at my office wearing designer clothes and her usual mask of social perfection, but I could see the nervousness underneath. She'd never been in my professional space before, never seen the awards on my walls, the patient testimonials, the photographs of me speaking at medical conferences. "Sophia," she began, "your office is impressive." "Dr. Blake," I corrected. "In this setting, I'm Dr. Blake. You're here as a patient, not as my mother." I conducted the consultation with the same professionalism I showed every patient. I examined her healing incisions, explained the scar revision options, discussed timeline and expectations. But I also did something I'd never been able to do before. I treated Victoria Richardson as just another patient instead of the woman whose approval I desperately sought for decades. Role reversal complete. For the first time in our relationship, she needed something from me that she couldn't get anywhere else. "Your technique really is remarkable," she admitted as I photographed her healing wounds for medical documentation. "The scarring is minimal. I barely notice it anymore." "That's the goal," I replied. "Every patient deserves to heal in a way that honors their dignity." She caught the implicit message that I'd treated her with more dignity than she'd ever shown me. Final revelation. Our last conversation in my office revealed exactly how much had changed between us. Sophia, Dr. Blake, I want you to know that I've been reading your research papers. I don't understand all the medical terminology, but I can see that you're helping people who've been through what you went through. That was always the plan, I said. I wanted to become the doctor I needed when I was a child dealing with skin problems and a family that was ashamed of them. Victoria looked around my office at the degrees, the awards, the thank you letters from patients whose lives I'd changed. I was wrong about everything, wasn't I? Truth and reconciliation. I could have been cruel. I could have made her grovel. But healing sometimes means being bigger than the wounds others have inflicted. You were wrong about my potential, I agreed. But you weren't wrong about everything. You were right that my skin condition would define my life. You just didn't understand that it would define it in a positive way. I showed her my latest research publication, a study on treating severe childhood eczema that had been featured in 3 major medical journals. These scars you were so ashamed of? They made me the doctor I am today. Every patient who sees them knows I understand their experience. Every technique I've developed comes from personal knowledge of what they're going through. Legacy moment. What Victoria said next proved that sometimes people can change, even when you least expect it. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Not because you're successful, but because you became someone who helps people feel less alone with their struggles. You turned your pain into purpose, and that's something I never understood how to do. It wasn't a complete redemption. 20 years of damage can't be erased by one honest conversation. But it was acknowledgement, recognition that the daughter she'd been ashamed of had become someone worthy of respect. Current success. Today, 2 years later, my relationship with my parents has evolved into something healthier, built on mutual respect rather than conditional approval. Victoria occasionally refers patients to my practice, people from her real estate network who need dermatological care. She's learned to introduce me as my daughter, Dr. Blake, instead of making excuses for my appearance. Michael invested in expanding my practice. Not as a father helping his child, but as a businessman recognizing a profitable venture. Blake Dermatology now has 3 locations and a research division. And me? I've become the leading expert in scar revision and reconstructive dermatology in the Midwest, with patients traveling internationally for my treatment protocols. Final triumph. But the most beautiful part of this story isn't the professional success, it's the personal transformation. Last month, I was invited to speak at the International Conference on Pediatric Dermatology. My presentation was titled Healing the Whole Patient, When Doctors Understand Their Patient's Shame. In the audience were hundreds of physicians from around the world, and in the front row sat Victoria and Michael Richardson. My parents, who had once been ashamed of their daughter's skin condition, watching that same daughter teach other doctors how to treat patients with dignity and understanding. After my presentation, Victoria approached me with tears in her eyes. I finally understand, she said. You didn't become successful despite your scars. You became successful because of them. Ultimate wisdom. Ladies, here's what I learned from this entire experience. Sometimes the things that make us feel most broken are actually preparing us to heal others. The scars my mother was ashamed of became my greatest professional asset. The shame she made me feel became empathy I could offer patients. The healing I had to do from her rejection became the foundation for helping others heal from their own wounds. Final message. And that night in the emergency room when she screamed about my infected wounds, that became the moment I realized I didn't need her validation anymore. I had my own. Victoria Richardson may have given birth to me, but Dr. Sophia Blake created herself. And honey, that's the most beautiful kind of healing, the kind you do for yourself, by yourself, in service to others who need the same courage you had to find. Closing power statement. To every woman watching this who's been made to feel ashamed of something beyond her control, remember that your scars tell a story of survival, and survival is the foundation of strength. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can become wisdom. Some scars never fade, but they can become symbols of resilience. And sometimes, the people who hurt you most become the inspiration for the healing you bring to others. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's becoming so authentically yourself that their opinions become irrelevant. And ladies, irrelevance is the most beautiful form of justice. The ultimate twist reveals that Sophia's scars, the source of her mother's lifelong shame, became her greatest professional strength, making her the exact doctor her patients needed. While her mother's attempt to humiliate her in the ER actually showcased Sophia's expertise to her medical colleagues.